episode of Hot Topics as we continue with our series on the Christian and COVID-19. We are living in a very interesting context where we've had to put up various measures in our lives in order to protect one another, but also to protect ourselves. And so we're going to be engaging in this particular topic today, exploring what it means for individuals to respond ethically to the ongoing pandemic. Joining Ilse and I today to unpack this topic and to engage more is Sigelela and Zandiswa. But if you guys could just introduce yourself and let us know a bit about yourself, and then we'll take it from there.
So ladies first.
Ladies first.
Okay, so I am Zandiswa Kula, born and bred in the Eastern Cape, but I've recently migrated to Johannesburg for labor reasons. And I am a member of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, but today I've come in my own personal capacity. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Sigelela Ndlazi. I'm also from the Eastern Cape. I come from a legal and academic background. I'm also a writer of a blog where I deal with, social issues, legal issues, and political issues from all angles. It's not necessarily a legal only, type of sphere. And I'm happy to be here.
We're really excited to have you guys here. You bring a lot to this conversation, and we're really looking forward to what you are going to be able to share with us today through this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So to kick it off and just really go into it, I'm going to read a couple of statements. And I just want you to explore it from your experience and maybe from your knowledge. If these are myths or it's stuff that they're actually valid points that have been raised and people have experienced during this pandemic. And these are statements such as, social distancing is a myth to the poor in densely populated communities. 1. It is difficult to expect people to physically distance when they are packed like sardines into a taxi. The poor majority of our country are already living in a state of pandemic. Some of the factors illuminated by the current state of the economy. These are factors such as retrenchment, and having to go out to beg on a street corner in order to make sure that your children eat tonight. And just the last one, the pandemic has shown us that we are vulnerable. And as the most vulnerable people in society, how can Christians, or rather, let me rephrase that and say, the pandemic has exposed that those who are economically marginalized are vulnerable. And therefore, as the most vulnerable people in our economy, how do we then expect them to put the pandemic as a priority over another state that has already been existing in their lives for longer, far longer than the pandemic? Throw it to you. You can engage any of those. Are these myths? Are these valid points? And what have you observed around these?
Okay. Well, I think that these are definitely myths. Well, not in the sense that it's a myth that they're saying that it's a myth to expect anything else outside what is being said in those points. The reason I say that is because how do you expect people, for example, go gas, right? Go to Alex, right? The geographical nature of Alex does not allow for social distancing. How many people live in a house in Alex? So if 6 or more people live in a house, in a 2-roomed or 3-roomed house, right? How do you expect them to social distance? How to isolate, right? Also, how do you expect, because beginning of lockdown last year, right? The regulations were set out by the president. And he said that there would need to be social distancing, no people on the street, businesses would be closed down. Businesses that would be closed down were black businesses, specifically, the ones in the townships, right? That is where soldiers were raiding, in actual fact, and police were going to see to it that black people, in actual fact, keep to the regulations of lockdown. If you went to Brackenfell in the Western Cape, white people were having braais just outside their picket fences, right? And their lives went on. They were able to go shop, get their food. After that, stack up and be able to run with their lives. What happens to black people? You don't even have money, in actual fact, to be able to stack up food when it's month end, a normal month, right? You need more anyways. So that automatically means that you would have to go out for more, right? So then it's very unnatural to say or negate a people to a foreign system of existence while their material conditions, in actual fact, do not allow them the liberty, for instance, of isolating. We always say that in black families, there's no privacy in the sense of, like, for instance, how white people live, right? Where you are able to have your own room, right? Not sharing with siblings your own room, all of those things. You don't have that privilege at the level of privacy. So now, as much as we understand the necessity of social distancing, as much as we understand, for instance, the necessity of not having someone else have the pandemic, like the virus, right? You are unable to, because of the nature, for instance, in which your existence is formulated, to be able to do the things that they want you to do.
Sigilela, and just as you're about to come in, there's something I really want to pick up on, because the reason I'm raising these points is, have we maybe, what I'm trying to get to is the point that have we maybe, or rather question that, have we maybe taken a system to manage the pandemic that is a misfit in our society, given the inequalities and how our society is structured, and thus makes it difficult for people to genuinely respond ethically, makes it impossible for them to respond ethically to the ongoing pandemic.
And I want to jump in right there, Hloni, because I think it's quite responsible of us also to acknowledge that the onus that the government has put on, the country as a whole to perform, the social distancing guidelines and the practices, and wash your hands every single day, don't go to school or to work if you can work from home, education, if you can, learn online. I think to myself, how do you expect someone to survive ethically, per your rules and regulations as the government? How do you expect someone to survive a pandemic that requires them to constantly wash, their hands with soap and water when they actually even struggle to access drinking water on a regular basis? I don't think these issues facing black people, predominantly black people, are new issues, but they are highlighted now by the pandemic. And I love how you approach it from, are these regulations and safety guidelines a misfit to our country? I think they would not be a misfit if our government had actually done their responsibilities, executed their roles as a government earlier on. It's a human right to have running water. It's a human right to have access to food. People living in densely populated rural areas have to travel on taxis and buses and Hloni to access healthcare services. Yet you want, the bus in which they are in to only accommodate half of the load. The bus companies also have to make money. So then I love the shock that the government got with this, because seeing how, ENCA covered, immensely all these breaking of the rules, especially in the townships, not one time did I actually blame the black people, because they actually don't have the means to see to actually executing all these regulations and all these practices. I would love for people to stay home and to have space between them and have running water to wash their hands every day. But the reality is that they don't. They barely have water to drink in their bodies. And you expect them to use water to wash their hands 3 times a day, and for the 12 family members also in the house. It's just, it's impractical, and the government has erroneously put the onus on the people instead of saying, okay, this is what we wish was possible, and it's not possible. Them, the government, should acknowledge that it's not possible because they, the government, have failed to actually put into place all these measures way before the pandemic.
I think you both are very right, and you highlight some very critical issues to this discussion, that it's just not possible in the current state of reality. How do we then engage, in your thoughts and opinions, how do we then engage a space that we have these realities that people face every day? On the other side, we have the realities of the pandemic, which is being scientifically proved to us to say that these are the measures that need to be taken to help people. There's this tension between what we wish we could do and what needs to be done, and there's no resource resource to do it. What does ethical socialization look like? What does ethical living for the everyday individual look like in that space when they are under-resourced, underprivileged, and not able to do what is being asked for them?
Well, I think that we need to be able to understand, right, whenever it is that we are looking for solutions, understand the nature of the problem, right? And as to why Usiki, right, says that, and he reflects on or highlights, in actual fact, on how the government has failed, in actual fact, to provide the basic necessity, right, to human beings, right, who are deserving of human dignity. So now you have a government and a system that does not care about human dignity, right, and acknowledging that we are people, right? We don't need to go and protest for people to see that we need water, that we need electricity, that we need a decent plot of land, or like at least a spacious land to live on. It's degrading on its own to go and stand in the street and parade our pain and our agony, in actual fact, of the injustices that have been met against us as African people. So the system itself does not allow us the luxury, in actual fact, to start thinking about how do we start looking for water, because they have not been able to do that for more than 300 years. So what will make them do that now in a space of 1 year, right? Because there's a pandemic, right? Black people have been dropping dead time and time again because of petty things like crime, right? They're stabbed. They are viruses, in actual fact. Your AIDS, before that your cancer, right? There are many things that are killing African people. And poverty is one of them, in actual fact, in terms of the African continent. That's the leading.
It's the biggest pandemic.
Yeah.
It's the biggest pandemic.
And it's beyond. COVID has not been able to kill us at the level at which poverty has been able to kill African people. Now, all of a sudden, a virus is introduced, right? And then a whole system of how we live and how we do things has to change. Now, you must understand that African people have already been existing from a position of survival, right? This whole thing that we are in right now has been an inclination of survival this whole time, right? Now, you are saying to them again, adjust to another survival mode, right? One that deprives you of necessities, right? The way that you were able to go and get your water, right? You no longer are able to do that. Now you have to adjust to something different. So I maybe do not necessarily have faith, clearly, and honestly, I don't have faith that the government, that the system has our lives and our human dignity at the foot of how it is supposed to be doing things. So they're just simply governing things for the sake of governing. Hence, they were able to say to us that close down this social distance when you know that you stay in Kaelicha or in Kanin, where houses are on top of each other, but then you social distance. They say to students that you're going to go to school, fully aware that at schools, there are no sanitizing points. There are no PPEs. There are no, the pen that you write with is the pen that I give to the other. There's no social distancing in government schools. There are 40 students in one classroom. Also, they have not even been taught how to basic computer literature, or if I can put it like programming and all of those things. They're unaware of that, but you're saying to them that they should go online. And private schools are able to do that, and African people are unable to do that. What then happens to our children? So it's those things that it's fixing problems from the tail, but then the system itself is unable to do that. Hence, they're fixing problems from the tail.
I just want to jump in there and just hang on to the last point you made, fixing problems from the tail. You know what? I think the grand size of the issue that this country is facing, particularly with the trust relationship with the government, local government or national government or provincial, whatever. I think it would do us better as a country if our leaders actually looked at us and said, listen, all these things we have imposed on you, all these instructions, ever since the onslaught of the pandemic, we understand why you were not able to see them through, to execute them, because we never actually empowered you to be able to. I don't imagine out there that there is a person, black or white, green, whatever, who, stands there and goes, no, I don't want to social distance because I don't care, whatever. We want to live. We see what the news says. We see what the doctors say. We want to live. We want to survive this. However, it just, at some point, reality kicks in because you have to go to work at 5 o'clock and then the government's like, no, curfew is up until 6 a.m. or whatever. You have to do 1, 2, and 3. And there are so many hurdles in the way that you actually struggle to survive. I think we would benefit so much if the trust relationship between the people and the authorities was just focused on more thoroughly. I want my leaders to say, listen, as a country, I have failed you. I have failed you. You don't trust us because we have failed you. And I'm a news junkie. Every single day there's a thing on the commission about so many millions and billions squandered by politicians, whatever. People have become so numb to the fact that the people who are supposed to care for them have actually taken the resources that were supposed to be used to empower the people for themselves. And those weren't poor people even to begin with. But then the government people are just going to be like, no, listen, this is what happens. It takes forever. I was watching a TV show last night where people in Katlehong, I think, had applied for RTP houses in 1996. And to date, they had not been granted. Not all of them, as a community. And what happens then when the government fails to execute all their responsibilities? Criminality comes in. There are people who say, listen, if you pay me a little bribe here, give me a cool drink, I'll make sure I'll have your form in by the end of the week. It is hurtful to people.
Absolutely, Sigalela, and, as you were speaking, one of the thoughts that comes into mind is it is almost as though at some point, if the pandemic continues longer, a permit will be synonymous to a dompas, because those who will need permits are most likely those who would have needed a dompas. But, and I think what is also important to actually note is, one might be sitting at home and thinking to themselves, we're making it sound as though it is only black people who are finding it difficult to adapt to regulations. But the reality is the face of poverty in our country is black. And so in as much as it is not only black people, but the majority of those who would struggle because of the issues that we are highlighting are black people. And just to kick forward then, we've got there's a beautiful philosophy that we have not explored as Africans, that we have explored, that we have not explored as the new Africa, and that is Motsuki Motsukabatu. I am because you are. Am I interpreting it correctly?
Yeah.
Motsuki Motsukabatu. Yeah. But your humanity, we've got a harmonious relationship that mutually enables humanity. And the pandemic has forced us to acknowledge that reality. I remember watching the fundraising drives that were happening at the beginning of the pandemic, and you're like, what? South Africans are able to raise so much money within a week. And it tells you that this money has always been there. But the only problem is there is interest when it's a mutual problem. And perhaps then the problem has been the fact that poverty and every other factor has not been a mutual problem. It has not been a problem that is shared by everyone, and hence it has seemed as though there are no resources. And so just to kick us forward, I would want to then go on to explore, to say then as people in our society, as Christians, but even in secular society, what then does it mean for us to respond ethically to this pandemic? Is it something that stretches beyond the pandemic context by saying we should ask difficult questions about poverty, we should ask difficult questions about the state of living and the landless, the state of the fact that people do not have land, and that is the primary issue here when it comes to physically distancing. How should we respond to the pandemic, speaking in and also outside of the pandemic, but also speak within the pandemic context?
So I think that we've learned something, like when anything happens in actual fact, we ought to learn from whatever it is that takes place. But now, the nature in which we learn is dependent on the context, for instance, in which a particular thing takes place. So for example, with the pandemic, right, we learn in various ways. we are all of a sudden able to see that we are capable of things that we never thought, in actual fact, we were capable of, right? One thing that it has exposed us for, is that there's a lot of injustice, in actual fact, that takes place. And there's a lot of things that go without being accounted for, right? And as a result, for example, had we been a country, right, that was able to answer to its own questions or to its own problems, and we were able, in actual fact, to then plan as to how then do we orchestrate the following, depending on our problems, we would not need to have food drives. For instance, that's an example. We would not have to depend on SASSA, right? They would not have to buy us with 300 Rand, in actual fact, right? Because it would mean that we would have at least the basics. We would have housing, we would have a schooling system that is able to not be paid for by us, the poor people, right? Because we are a benefit to society, right? That's what knowledge does, in actual fact. And then also our healthcare system would not be, for instance, the poor get whatever it is that is left. And then people that are able to pay, they can go to private hospitals, get ventilators and so forth. And then the 500 billion that they go and loan the government on behalf of South Africans, which we are going to pay with our children. We are going to have to pay the 500 billion that they borrowed and ate with their children. We and our children are going to have to pay for that, right? It's not they did not give it away. They went to go and borrow it to do specific things, right? To develop certain parts of society for the benefit of the people within our society. They've failed to do that. We also can't believe a government that has been failing for more than 25 years is going to be able to now all of a sudden come and say to us that we have failed. Because also we must understand the nature of politics, right? This is a political game. No one ever, even when you see people dropping dead, in actual fact hungry, do you ever say that I have failed. You simply just point out a few things, in actual fact, but in essence we know that you have. So one thing that we have to understand is that I am thankful for one thing, that the church now understands its responsibility to society. That's one place within all sectors of society, I think, at least, I don't know if they understand, but I think that they've seen. Churches were open, in actual fact, for people to come and sleep in churches, right? Homeless people. Why have they not been doing that? Has God not been saying, for instance, that open up your churches for people that are homeless, your widows, right, as well? Why have they not been doing that? Till a pandemic strikes, that's the only time that you think that you can open a church? So our people have been suffering under the nose of churches, and they have not been doing anything about that. And it's not a, we must not pat them on the backs. It's their responsibility within society, not to only pray for us, but to change the ways in which society is orientated, and the practice of the gospel, right? The feeding of the needy. That's not a pat on the back. They're supposed to be doing that. But then, obviously, because they want to run sustainable NGOs, they want one plate a day. Where's the question of self-sustainability? When do we get to that place? Because it does not answer to the question of poverty and hunger. It does not also answer to, have we then found a solution to the pandemic, and how then do we run things? So there's a yin and a yang. There are things that we can work with, but then things that it has exposed that we really need to deal with.
Mm. And I don't disagree with all of that, but I just want to approach it from a different angle. From the very point where African people understood Ubuntu as a concept, as a life concept, as a lifestyle, it was not dependent on governments for them to say, listen, this is what you ought to do as an African person to your neighbor, to your brother, to whatever. Ubuntu came naturally. That is why it's called Ubuntu. I once read a book by a French author, and I really like the fact that he introduced the concept of Ubuntu only once, and then throughout the book, never even tried to, view it from a translated perspective. He called it Ubuntu. There is no other way to call Ubuntu than Ubuntu. We as people of color always knew that Ubuntu, your neighbor, is your responsibility. So I think, in an effort to respond to this pandemic and to all other pandemics, as we have done, previously, we should not now, throw our tools down and be like, okay, your responsibility. I mean, the government has the responsibility to actually now come and save you from whatever trauma you're going through as a result of whatever you're going through. Look to yourself as a person, black, white, I don't care, Indian, whatever. Look to yourself and say, okay, I am existing in this space. I'm sharing this space with my neighbor. My neighbor may have the same color as me or not. What can I do to enrich her life? What can I do to enrich his life? What can I do to ease her pain? You understand? So even if it's driving down the street and you see a person, begging for food, and you think to yourself, oh, but I don't have any food on me, but I've got money, and I know, the criticism about how, you should not give, money to, the person on the streets because they're going to buy drugs and whatever. What I always say, and I learned this from my sister, she said she is now beyond the point where she, is going to adhere to all those instructions of do not give money to the person on the street who's begging, as a result of the pandemic or whatever, because that is not your responsibility to be in charge of whatever they do with that money. What they do with that money, buy drugs or buy bread, is between them and their God. Your responsibility between yourself and your God is to execute your responsibility to actually feed your brother, to feed your neighbor. Whatever they do with that money has nothing to do with you. Do not mind that. You have executed your responsibility. So whenever we wake up in the morning and we welcome in a new day, I think as people, we should just always ask, I wonder what my neighbor needs. Let me just call my friend and just see, what do they need? Are they okay?
But then, Sigilela, just on that point of Ubuntu quickly, I then want to find out, I understand the points that we are mentioning around how difficult and impossible it is for people, particularly who do not have enough space, who do not have enough resources to adhere to the regulations. But then where does Ubuntu then come in for a family that is living together and there is someone who is high risk in that family and they are living in a densely populated community? How then do I respond ethically to say, I'm not going to change my realities in this pandemic, but what is my responsibility to the people that I live with? What if I bring this pandemic from whichever spaces I'm engaging in? And I would even pick on you, Zandi, so I'd say, what if I bring my pandemic from a protest by being engaged in protest action without a mask? Where is the place of Ubuntu within this discourse?
Just a side note, I've been to, I don't know how many protests during this lockdown. All of us, some have masks, some don't. None of us have dropped dead of the people that have been there.
But my point is you are bringing it to someone else. It's Ubuntu.
No, I'll get to your question. I was just saying a side note.
Just so he knows.
I think that we must be able to understand what Ubuntu is. We must always look at not throwing words just because they feel good and they portray a particular idea. Every word that was used within African culture had a particular reason. There's no word that just came for the sake of it. All words, in actual fact, hence we don't have words like itafil. These were objects that were not there, right? So then there was no use for a word of that nature. Hence we borrow some words from other languages, simply because everything was named on the basis of its function or what it represents, but then it's on that basis. So even Ubuntu was not just a gloomy word, for instance, that I care for you because you care for me. The very society, the very essence of the society, it was collective. You understood that when you are someone's child, you don't belong to them alone. You belong to everyone there, right? And everyone had a right to, how do you call that, to bring you up, to nurture you. They had a soul, not a soul right, but a collective right to
it
how...
took a village.
Yes, to how you would live. Even, for instance, if you look at the early scholars, right, of like African scholars, the early ones, what would happen was that whenever they're sending them overseas to go and study, when they've studied in these Catholic schools and so forth, what would happen was that people within the village would use their own money. They would chaft money or chaft a goat or whatever valuable thing that they have to be able to add on so that that person could be able to go and be educated somewhere else. But then it always had a responsibility. You go and educate, but when you come back, you have a responsibility to benefit the lives of the people, in actual fact, whom have groomed you to be what you are. Not this thing of black privilege that we now have, or black tax and all of these things that we now coin. But then getting back to your point as to how then, for instance, if I have COVID, right, how do I take a responsibility of making sure that the people around me are not affected, right? I think that it doesn't just go one way. There's one member of ours who had fever, right? So what happened is that within the community, they had a responsibility to take your garlics, your natural herbs, right, to his place. So then they would put it there so that he doesn't make contact with them, because what they valued more than anything was that he needs to get better, right? And if this thing kills, he can't be dying, right? And he had a responsibility, which was he needed to be in a place where he knew that he does not pass the disease on, or at least the people at home need to also be going through the very same process that you're going through. If, for instance, you are unable to self-quarantine. So, for example, if there are 5 people in the house, it means that we all steam, right? Because some people are symptomatic, some people are not, right? And it could be that more of us have contracted the disease in actual fact, but it's just that we don't know about it. But then it just meant that all of us have to be able to get our bodies fit, at least, so that when it does come to me, my body can at least be able to fight it off. So I think that we need to be able to understand that the whole of our existence has to be wired in a particular way for us to be able to. So Ubuntu does not become a thing, for instance, for a particular NGO, helping hand or whatever. It becomes, in essence, the way in which society, for instance, is embroidered. So it becomes a socialist society, if I can put it that way, where you know that education, for instance, is not a privilege. It's of basic necessity to all of us. Healthcare is for all of us, right? Because we need to be able to have our bodies function, right? All of these things have to be able to be understood that they are of essential service and benefit to us, and we all deserve them. The very same thing like the land, right? We all deserve to live on land, because you can't live on air. Yeah.
I want to jump onto that because we've got so little time left. I love this idea that you're exploring, and I want to kind of take it back to a very Christian term. Okay, it doesn't equate fully, but as Christians, we are called to stewardship, which means being responsible with whatever we're given to God. Why I want to go to that is this idea with stewardship is it's not mine because I earned it, but I'm given it, I look after it, I use it, but it doesn't belong to me. I want to extend that idea to our ethical individual response in this time. How in every aspect of life, you come from a different sphere I come from. We're all in different aspects of life, in different aspects of work, study. How can we extend those ideas as Christians that we are held to a different way of living? Whether it be, if you're dealing in a business, how can you extend that idea of stewardship to your human resource, to the resources that cross your desk every day, to your bank account, and all those, to business practices, to where your employees are working from? How do we extend this idea? Within our households, how do we extend this idea of stewardship? Whether it be in the privileged or the less privileged, it could be stuff like, when I have an abundance of food, what do I do with it? If I'm able to afford enough food and more, is my individual response not to maybe buy less food, because then less goes off in my fridge? And that means that if we're looking at sustainability in farming, that there is actually more supply to those who are not able to. Those types of things is what I'm asking you guys. Maybe if you've thought of some ways that we can very practically, within individuals at home as well, apply to our lives with this idea of Ubuntu and stewardship as well. Just in the very few minutes we've got left.
All right, just briefly, and I love how you hook stewardship onto Ubuntu, because in the very essence of Ubuntu is stewardship. I have 5 rand in my hand, and I could have earned that, through my employment or whatever. However, stewardship then comes in to say, I've got this 5 rand, but I know my circumstance at home, and I could live on 3, but what about the 2? You understand? So let me give that to a person who does not have. And it does not even have to be in monetary terms or anything, even if it's just conversation. There are people out there who, have not formed opinions about what they believe, throughout this whole pandemic. And your role might actually even be to invoke an opinion out of them. It's not necessarily, an idea that should be encapsulated in what can I give, so maybe in terms of food or money or whatever, even intangible goods, you understand? Allowing you to have the space so that we can just have a conversation, you understand? So I love how you hook, the stewardship to Ubuntu, because those are clearly intertwined philosophically.
I'm not sure if I'm correct, right? To be a person who is a minister or a pastor, it means you steward, right? Is that not, unless I'm not...
You steward and you also shepherd, you
Yeah.
lead people, you
like
guide.
discipling, right? That's exactly what, for instance, a person who's a pastor is called to do, right? You're not called to all of these things that we add on, like these add-ons of the gospel, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but what I was trying to say is that the gospel itself teaches us, right, to take care, right? Had we taken care of the land, for example, we would not be having the eco crisis that we're having, in actual fact. You find that in KZN right now there's a cyclone, or there will be one that they're preparing for. In Limpopo as well, that is what is happening, right? So society has turned into something that's very abnormal because we failed to be stewards, right? Now, we need to be able to relearn many things, right? This is an opportunity. Hence, I said that in different circumstances, you're negated to learn in various ways, right? Now, this is harsh learning, obviously. But then you have to learn, right? To understand and to see people for who they are. The reason why we've been having problems within society is because we've failed, for instance, to understand or to see, in actual fact, who a person is because of various things, because of various created, man-made, in actual fact, theories as to you're lesser of, you're more of, or all of those things. You are deserving of more privilege than I do, right? And economically, for instance, the poor, for instance, have to stand on their own. The rich will have to see whatever they do. But then we must be able, it goes back to that thing that the very fabric of society needs to change in order for us to be able to relay those things. We don't affect society to a particular way. So society orchestrates us to be whatever it is that it wants us to be. Hence, we have not been taking care of many things that we were supposed to be taking care of, right? It's not because you don't care that you never took care of it. It's just that you were indoctrinated to not care, right? For many years, because of the society that you live in and so on and so forth. So until we move back to a place where we understand the essence of human existence, in actual fact, is to take care and to see and to be aware and to be alive and be in the moment, right? Or to see, right? Then you'll be able to do all of these things that you would need to do.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. And I think there is so much to really unpack around this conversation. There are still issues around our responsibility if we're in business. Is this an opportunity for businesses to just close shop and save their savings for post-pandemic context and just retrench people? It's been a very common practice in corporate SA. There's still issues around what is my responsibility towards the lady who is working or helping us in our household, during the pandemic. There's just so much to explore. However, we're going to leave it here for tonight in the interest of time. And so we just want to invite you, if you're joining us from home, to please log in next week, Sunday, where we're going to be further unpacking it and giving you an opportunity to really give your contribution and tell us what your heart and your mind is around this. And even if you have any questions that you would love us to consider during the course of the week leading up to our Sunday session, I'd just love to encourage you to please email us those questions. Our email will appear, our Hot Topics email will appear just at the bottom of the screen. But apart from that, I think a big thank you to Sigelela and to Zandiswa.
Thank
and
you.
to Ilse. Thank you so much,
Thank you
guys.
for
I hope
having
it is
us.
not the last time we have you around. And thank you to everyone else at home. Thank you so much.